The small-town cafe smelled of fresh pastries and bitter espresso, a quiet refuge where locals came to start their day. At a corner table sat a black woman in her early 50s, dressed simply in a navy blouse and jeans. Her name was Angela Carter, a woman known for her calm demeanor, though few in this town knew much about her. She carried herself with quiet dignity, preferring to stay out of trouble and keep her thoughts to herself. That morning, the door swung open with a sharp creak. In walked Officer Randall Briggs, a uniformed cop whose reputation carried whispers of arrogance and prejudice. He strutted toward the counter, nodding curtly at the barista, then scanned the room with a smirk. His eyes landed on Angela. Something about her silent posture seemed to irritate him. Without warning, he approached her table, holding a steaming paper cup. "You think you belong here?" he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. Angela met his gaze but said nothing, her silence more piercing than any words. Briggs sneered, tilting the cup. In one swift, deliberate motion, he poured the hot coffee across her table, splashing onto her blouse. Gasps filled the cafe. The barista froze, horrified, while a few customers reached for their phones. Angela didn't flinch. She calmly dabbed at her sleeve with a napkin, her composure unsettling the officer. "You'll regret that," she said softly, her tone almost prayer-like. Briggs laughed mockingly, convinced he had humiliated her. But what he didn't know, what no one in that cafe yet realized, was that Angela Carter wasn't just an ordinary woman. She had raised someone who would turn this town upside down. The storm was only beginning. The cafe was buzzing like a hive after the officer's stunt. Customers whispered behind their cups, their eyes darting between Angela and Officer Briggs. Some recorded discreetly, while others argued whether it was worth intervening. Angela remained composed, still dabbing the hot stain on her blouse. The burn was real, but her dignity burned brighter. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand justice, not yet. Her silence unsettled people more than if she had shouted. The barista, a nervous young man named Lucas, finally approached. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," he stammered, offering a fresh cup of coffee and a stack of napkins. His hands shook as he glanced at Briggs, who leaned back in his chair with smug satisfaction. "Don't waste your sympathy on her," Briggs barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And some people need reminders about where they belong." His words cut through the cafe like knives, leaving a chilling silence in their wake. Angela looked up, her eyes calm but sharp. "Respect isn't yours to give, officer," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, unshaken. For the first time, Briggs's smirk faltered. At that moment, the door jingled open again. A tall figure entered, broad-shouldered, dressed in casual clothes, but walking with unmistakable authority. His eyes scanned the cafe, immediately catching sight of his mother's stained blouse. His jaw tightened. It was Marcus Carter, Angela's only son. The man she had raised in silence, strength, and discipline. To most people here, he was just another stranger returning home. But Angela knew the truth. Her son wasn't ordinary. He carried a reputation that reached far beyond this small town. And the officer who had mocked his mother had no idea who he had just challenged. Marcus Carter stepped further into the cafe, his presence commanding attention even before a word left his lips. Standing 6'3", with broad shoulders and a steady gaze, he looked like a man who had weathered storms far harsher than this one. The cafe grew quieter, the whispers dying down as all eyes followed his deliberate stride toward Angela's table. "Mom," Marcus said softly, his voice filled with both warmth and concern. He pulled out a chair, crouching beside her. "What happened?" His eyes flicked to the wet stain across her blouse, then to the officer lounging smugly at the next table. Angela gave a faint smile, shaking her head. "Nothing I can't handle," she whispered. Her hand rested on his arm, steady, urging patience. But Marcus wasn't just any son. He was Major Marcus Carter, a decorated U.S. Army officer whose service overseas had earned him medals, respect, and loyalty from countless soldiers. The town hadn't seen him in years. Many didn't even know Angela's quiet life concealed a son who had commanded battalions. Officer Briggs chuckled, mistaking Marcus's restraint for weakness. "Is this your boy? Figures," he sneered. "Runs home the second mama cries." The cafe tensed. Customers who had been silent now shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of something about to break. Marcus stood tall, towering over Briggs, his jaw tightening but his voice calm. "You poured coffee on my mother?" Marcus asked, his words clipped, precise. Briggs leaned back, arms crossed. "Yeah, I did. And what are you going to do about it?" Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned in slightly, his tone low but razor-sharp. "The better question is, do you know who you just disrespected?" The officer blinked, uncertainty flashing across his face for the first time. The storm Marcus carried was far bigger than Briggs could imagine. The cafe air grew heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Officer Briggs's smirk lingered, but the crack in his confidence had already begun to show. He glanced around, noticing the eyes and phones pointed at him. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just another morning power play, it was becoming a spectacle. Marcus didn't move quickly, didn't raise his hands, didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he placed both palms flat on the table, leaning just enough for his presence to press down on Briggs like a shadow. "You see this woman?" Marcus said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of authority. "She has spent her whole life teaching people like me discipline, integrity, and respect. She raised me into the man I am today. And the man I am—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Is not someone you want as an enemy." Briggs scoffed, though his laugh was tight, nervous. "Big talk. You think your fancy words scare me?" Angela, still seated, spoke up, her voice gentle yet sharp enough to cut through his bravado. "Randall Briggs, do you know what happens when arrogance meets truth?" The officer turned toward her, sneering again, but Marcus cut in with chilling precision. "Officer, I've seen men who thought they were untouchable. I've seen them crumble in front of the world. You're seconds away from becoming one of them." The cafe fell silent again, the weight of Marcus's words pressing on everyone. The barista stopped pretending to clean. Customers leaned forward, drawn into the moment. Briggs shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't know Marcus's full story yet, but the authority in his tone and the unshaken calm in Angela's eyes were enough to send unease crawling under his skin. This wasn't over. The tension inside the cafe split the room into two sides, those who quietly sided with Angela and Marcus and those too afraid of Officer Briggs to speak up. Whispers circulated like wildfire. Phones kept recording, screens glowing as the story took shape in real time. Angela sat with the same calm presence she had always carried, but her eyes told a different story: disappointment. She had seen prejudice her entire life, endured it, but watching her son now, back from years of service, facing it head-on, stirred something deeper. Marcus, standing firm, scanned the room. His gaze landed on one customer near the back, a middle-aged woman clutching her phone tightly. She mouthed to him, "I'm live-streaming this." Marcus gave a subtle nod. The truth was already slipping beyond these cafe walls. Briggs, noticing the phones, grew louder, trying to reassert control. "Record all you want. This is my town, my badge, my rules." His voice cracked slightly, but he disguised it with forced bravado. A young man at the counter, barely 20, muttered, "Not anymore, it isn't." Others nodded in agreement. The cafe wasn't on Briggs's side. It was shifting toward Angela and Marcus. Angela finally spoke again, her voice calm but piercing. "Randall Briggs, my son has faced men with power far greater than yours, men who thought cruelty made them strong, and every time, truth revealed their weakness." Marcus leaned closer, his voice low enough that only Briggs could hear. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away, one chance to leave with what little dignity you have left." Briggs stiffened, sweat beading at his temple. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just a confrontation, it was the beginning of something much bigger. The world was already watching. Officer Briggs pushed back his chair, the legs scraping harshly against the tiled floor. The cafe jolted with the sound, but Marcus didn't flinch. Angela's steady eyes stayed locked on the officer, calm yet unyielding. "You think this uniform makes me untouchable?" Briggs spat, tugging at his badge as if it were a shield. "This town respects me. This town fears me." Marcus's lips curled into the faintest smile. Fear isn't respect, and respect isn't earned with spilled coffee. The words struck harder than Briggs expected. For a moment his face flickered with doubt before he puffed his chest again. He reached for his radio, but a voice from the back of the cafe interrupted. "Don't even think about it," said an older man in work boots. He stood, holding his phone high. "The world is already watching, Briggs. Try calling backup. You'll only bury yourself deeper." Other customers raised their phones in silent defiance, a wave of quiet resistance against the badge that had bullied too many. Briggs's bravado wavered as he realized his usual intimidation wasn't working here. Angela finally rose from her seat, smoothing her blouse despite the stain. Her calmness seemed almost supernatural, unnerving Briggs even further. She stepped closer to her son, but it wasn't Marcus she looked at. It was the officer. "My son doesn't need to prove himself to you," Angela said evenly. "He's already done more for this country than your badge ever could." Marcus's voice followed like a hammer striking steel. "Major Marcus Carter, U.S. Army, and you just disrespected the mother of a decorated officer who's commanded men braver than you'll ever be." Briggs blinked, stunned. His smirk vanished completely. The room buzzed with gasps, whispers, and the click of cameras capturing the moment. The badge wasn't a shield anymore. It was a crack in his armor. The revelation hit the cafe like thunder. Major Marcus Carter. The name rolled through the room, whispered from table to table until even those without their phones knew something monumental was unfolding. The young woman live-streaming whispered breathlessly, "People are joining by the hundreds. No, thousands. They're asking who this cop is." Her voice trembled with both fear and awe. Briggs tried to laugh it off, but his voice betrayed him. "So what? A soldier boy thinks he can scare me?" He forced a grin, though sweat glistened on his brow. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't take a step closer. He simply stood in stillness, his presence louder than any threat. "I don't need to scare you," he said. "Your actions already did that for you." Angela's hand brushed her son's arm, steadying him. Her voice was soft, but every word carried across the cafe. "Randall, one day you'll understand that cruelty is never strength. Today might be that day." The cafe door swung open again, and a man in civilian clothes but with the posture of authority walked in. He was tall, clean-cut, with a sharp gaze that immediately scanned the room. Several customers murmured his name, Colonel David Harris. Harris was a long-time family friend, another decorated officer who had once served alongside Marcus. His sudden presence electrified the room. "Marcus," Harris greeted, his tone grave. "I heard there was trouble." His eyes fell on Angela, then on Briggs. "Seems I got here just in time." Briggs blinked rapidly, his bravado draining faster now. He didn't know whether to defend himself or back away, but with phones streaming, with Marcus standing like a sentinel, and now with Harris watching. The truth wasn't just in this cafe anymore, it was spreading like wildfire across the nation. Colonel Harris stepped fully into the cafe, his boots striking the floor with deliberate weight. The murmurs quieted as he surveyed the scene. Angela's stained blouse, Marcus standing tall, and Briggs shrinking beneath the collective gaze of the room. "Officer," Harris said firmly, his voice carrying military authority, "explain yourself." Briggs stiffened. She was sitting there, acting like she owned the place. "I," reminded her of her place. His words stumbled out, flimsy against the silence that followed. Harris's jaw clenched. He turned his gaze to Angela, softening instantly. "Mrs. Carter, are you all right?" Angela gave a small nod. "I've endured worse," she replied quietly, but Marcus's eyes darkened at her words, fury restrained by discipline. The colonel turned back to Briggs. "Do you realize who you've just humiliated? This woman raised a soldier who's served with more honor than you could imagine. Marcus Carter isn't just my comrade, he's a hero." Gasps rippled across the cafe. Phones captured every word. The live stream numbers ticked upward, a silent storm brewing online. Briggs faltered. "I didn't know. That's the problem," Harris cut in sharply. "You didn't care to know. You wear a badge, but you disgrace it every time you act like this." Angela finally spoke, her voice calm but unshakable. "Colonel, Marcus, let him speak. Let the world hear him justify cruelty." Marcus crossed his arms, his silence more punishing than words. Briggs looked around desperately, but the cafe had turned against him. No allies, no support, only cameras, judgment, and the weight of truth. Colonel Harris's voice dropped, steely and final. "You've already lost, officer. The only question now is how far you'll fall." Briggs swallowed hard. The fall had only begun. By now, the cafe wasn't just a cafe, it was a courtroom, and the jury was the entire internet. The live stream ticked past 50,000 viewers, comments flooding in with outrage and disbelief. Words like "fire him," "racist cop," and "hero's mom" scrolled rapidly across the screen. Officer Briggs's once cocky posture collapsed under the weight of eyes, both in the room and online. His fingers twitched nervously at his belt, hovering near his badge as though it could still shield him. But the badge no longer looked like authority, it looked like a stain. Marcus remained composed, though every muscle in his frame spoke of restrained fury. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice calm yet devastating. "You tried to humiliate a woman who built her life on grace and sacrifice, and you disrespected the mother of a man who's given everything to protect this country." Angela, still dignified despite the stain on her blouse, gently placed her hand on Marcus's arm. "Son," she said softly, "don't let anger win. We already have the truth." Briggs's lips trembled, his voice breaking. I didn't know she was your mother. I didn't know who you were." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "That's your problem. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The cafe erupted in agreement, snaps of fingers, murmurs of "that's right," even a cheer from the back. Colonel Harris crossed his arms, glaring at Briggs. "You've brought disgrace not just to yourself, but to your badge and this town," Briggs stammered. I was just—" "No excuses," Harris cut him off. "The world already saw who you are, and indeed the world wasn't just watching, it was judging." The cracks in Briggs's armor had become gaping wounds. The cafe door hadn't closed since the storm began. People kept coming in, curious locals, reporters rushing with cameras, all drawn by the viral stream. The quiet corner diner had become the stage for a national reckoning. Officer Briggs's radio suddenly crackled at his hip. A sharp voice came through. "Briggs, report." Now, his hand hovered over it, but hesitation froze him. Colonel Harris stepped forward. "Answer it. Let your superiors hear this too." Reluctantly, Briggs lifted the radio. "This is Officer Briggs. I have a situation." His voice wavered, trembling in front of the entire cafe. A second voice cut in, this one calm, commanding, unmistakably high-ranking. "Officer Briggs, this is Chief Daniels. I've been watching the live stream. Do not move. Internal Affairs is on the way." Gasps erupted across the cafe. Briggs's face went pale. His safety net had collapsed. Angela clasped her hands together, her calm smile unshaken. "The truth always finds its way," she murmured. Marcus leaned closer, speaking so only Briggs could hear. "You see, my mother didn't raise a man to fight for vengeance. She raised a man to fight for justice. And justice doesn't stop at your badge." Phones buzzed as notifications poured in. National news outlets were already sharing the footage. Hashtag sword online, hashtag justice for Angela, hashtag hero's mum, end badge abuse. Briggs's voice cracked as he muttered, This is out of control." "No," Marcus corrected, standing taller. "This is accountability." The cafe erupted in applause, quiet at first, then swelling until the room thundered with it. Angela, graceful as ever, simply bowed her head. For Officer Briggs, the walls of his false power were crumbling fast. But for Angela, the dignity she carried all her life was shining brighter than ever before. Minutes felt like hours as the cafe transformed into a stage where truth stood taller than power. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, confirmation that Internal Affairs was already en route. Customers crowded by the windows, their phones raised high to capture every second. Angela, still stained with coffee, sat back down with quiet grace. To her, this wasn't victory, it was vindication. She whispered to Marcus, "I taught you that silence can be stronger than rage. Today, let silence speak louder than fists." Marcus nodded, restraining the fire in his chest. His voice was measured when he addressed Briggs again. "You thought pouring coffee would strip away her dignity, but all it did was strip away your mask." Briggs's face was drained of color. His hands fidgeted uselessly at his sides, the badge on his chest gleaming like a spotlight of shame. "You don't understand," he mumbled. "This town, this department, they always back me." Colonel Harris stepped forward, his tone sharp as steel. "Not anymore. The world is watching. Your department can't cover this up, not with 50,000 witnesses streaming it live." The barista, Lucas, finally found his courage. He raised his voice, shaky but resolute. "I saw everything. If they ask, I'll testify." Others in the cafe echoed agreement, a chorus of voices rising against one man's cruelty. Briggs stumbled back a step, overwhelmed by the sudden tide of truth pressing against him. For the first time, his badge looked heavy, dragging him down instead of holding him up. Angela looked at him, her voice calm and final. "Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you give. Today, you lost it forever." At that moment, red and blue lights flickered through the cafe windows. Justice had arrived. Two unmarked cars screeched to a halt outside the cafe. The door burst open as two stern-looking internal affairs officers stepped inside, their presence radiating authority. The crowd parted instinctively, phones still raised, capturing every angle. "Officer Randall Briggs," one of them announced, voice firm and deliberate. "You are being placed under investigation for misconduct and abuse of authority. Hand over your badge and service weapon immediately." The cafe went silent. Briggs froze, sweat dripping down his temple. For years his badge had shielded him, made him untouchable. Now it was being stripped from him in front of the very people he had once intimidated. I didn't mean," Briggs stammered, his words dissolving under the weight of the moment. His trembling hand reached for the badge, unpinning it from his chest. The metallic click echoed louder than any sound that day. Gasps filled the cafe. Phones zoomed in. Streams exploded with comments. "It's happening! Accountability! Finally!" Marcus watched quietly, his arms folded. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, only solemn justice. Angela, graceful as ever, whispered a prayer under her breath, not for vengeance, but for healing. The officer collected Briggs's badge and sidearm, locking them in a case. "You'll answer to a review board," he said coldly. "Effective immediately, you are suspended." Briggs's shoulders collapsed. The man who once strutted with arrogance now looked small, stripped of both power and pride. Colonel Harris turned to Marcus. "Your mother's dignity is intact." The truth prevailed. Angela rose, her blouse still stained, but her spirit shining brighter than ever. "Justice isn't about revenge," she said softly. "It's about reminding the world that dignity cannot be poured away like coffee." The cafe erupted, not with chaos, but with applause. The applause inside the cafe didn't fade quickly. It swelled, carrying with it the sense that something larger than coffee and spilled arrogance had taken place. This was about dignity, about justice, and about the strength of a quiet woman who had endured in silence until truth revealed itself. Angela stood in the center of the room, her blouse stained but her presence radiant. She wasn't a politician, a celebrity, or a public speaker. Yet in that moment, her words carried more weight than any headline. "Every mother teaches her child something," Angela said, her voice firm yet gentle. "I taught my son that respect is not earned by force but by honor, that strength is not measured in how loud you shout, but in how steady you stand. Today, I thank God that lesson never left him." Marcus lowered his head, humbled by his mother's words. He had faced war zones, commanded men under fire, and carried medals across his chest, but nothing filled him with more pride than being known as her son. Reporters outside were now pressing against the glass, cameras flashing. The live stream numbers soared past 100,000, and hashtags trended worldwide. Colonel Harris placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "The world will remember this day, not because of the disgrace of a man who misused his badge, but because of the dignity your mother carried." Briggs, escorted out in handcuffs, glanced back once. His face was pale, hollow. He had thought Angela was invisible, powerless. Instead, she had become the symbol of everything he wasn't. Angela turned to Marcus and smiled softly. "I didn't raise a soldier," she whispered. "I raised a man who stands for what's right." And the cafe erupted again, this time in cheers that felt like redemption. The cafe slowly emptied as reporters crowded outside, eager to catch a glimpse of the woman and her son who had become symbols overnight. Inside, the atmosphere softened. The chaos had passed, leaving behind a powerful stillness. Angela sat once more at her corner table, this time with a fresh cup of coffee, offered free by Lucas, the barista, his hands steady now. "On the house, ma'am," he said proudly, "for the strongest woman I've ever met." She smiled, accepting it with quiet grace. To her, it wasn't about the coffee, but about the respect it carried. Marcus stood beside her, his tall frame casting a protective shadow. "Mom," he said softly, "you've been strong your whole life. Today the world finally saw it." Angela shook her head gently. "The world didn't see me. They saw what I raised. You stood when others stayed silent. That's the legacy I wanted." Outside, chants began. People who had seen the live stream arriving at the cafe, holding signs, "Justice for Angela, dignity wins, respect all mothers." What began as humiliation had grown into a movement. Colonel Harris leaned toward Marcus. "This is bigger than you think, People are already calling for reforms. Your mother's story, it's going to change things. Angela sipped her coffee calmly. Change doesn't start with noise, it starts with truth. As the cameras finally streamed in, Angela rose to her feet, standing tall despite the stain that still marked her blouse. That mark, once meant to humiliate, had become a symbol, proof that dignity cannot be drowned, only revealed. She clasped her son's hand, lifting it slightly. "If the world remembers me at all," she said softly, "let them remember I raised a man who stood for justice." The cafe erupted one last time in thunderous applause, and with it, a legacy was boring.